Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Ed Nawotka. I'm the international editor of Publishers Weekly, and we have gathered here as on the occasion of the Moscow Book Fair under the sponsorship of the Bologna Book Fair to convene a panel about nonfiction children's book publishing. The topic is going to cover the process, all of the elements that might go into this, from picture books to YA. We're going to focus in part on science and technology writing, but also all the various subjects that our panelists here have covered. I'm going to let each individual panelist just say a little bit about themselves and their work and their background before we get into a conversation. And we hope that if anybody has questions, that they'll be able to ask a little bit later in the session when we have some time to address them. So fantastic. Thank you very much. Let's start. Bernardo, perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are. Let's begin who you are, where you are talking to us from, and about your work.
So I'm Bernardo Carvalho. I live and I'm in Lisbon right now, not quite in the center. I live in the suburb, and that's where I work too. So I'm an illustrator and a publisher. That said, it means that I almost have no clients. I just publish my own books and the books that me and other people in Planeta Tangerina do. So, and right now I'm doing a new book. I've just finished one, I'm doing another, and that's always like that.
Always a process, never stops. Exactly. Giorgia, could you tell us about yourself a little bit?
Hi, everyone. I'm Giorgia Grilli. I teach children's literature at Bologna University to future teachers, primary school teachers, kindergarten teachers. And I'm a scholar of children's literature, children's publishing. So I did a research, I'll tell you more about it later, on nonfiction picture books that lasted 2 years. It's still running.
Fantastic. Grace, would you like to tell us about yourself a little bit?
Oh. Hi, I'm Grace Macaron. I'm executive editor at Holiday House Books for Young Readers. We are based in Manhattan in New York City, but right now I am working from home. We are an 85-year-old company. We publish books for children and only children, about 100 to 120 titles a year. We have 3 lists a year, and I'd say we do about 8 nonfiction titles per list. So that would be about 24 books per year. And we sell primarily to the school and public library market, more than to mass market. And that's who we are.
Perfect. Ilya, would you like to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Ilya. I live in Moscow, and I'm a popular science guy. I have been doing for many years reporting, editing, podcasting, web, print, splitting my time between children and adults nonfiction stuff. I cover science. I'm a biologist by training, and among other things, I published 2 small children books on biology. And I'm aspiring to learning things about it and expanding maybe to other languages.
You may be underselling yourself. I believe you're among the most popular of the science writers in the country, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that's an exaggeration, but by popular, popular was referring not to me, but to science. Popular science.
Fair enough. Gotcha. And lastly, Natalia, would you like to say hello and tell us?
Yes, good evening. I live in Moscow too, and I'm very happy to be here today and talk a little bit about what our publishing house is doing for kids. And I'm representing Alpina Nonfiction publishing house. I'm an editor, and as you may know, the primary focus of our publishing house is pop science literature. And our portfolio includes hundreds books by authors. Top line popularizers of science from all around the world, such as Michio Kaku, Carol Sagan, Robert Sapolsky, and so on. And I'm, well, thank you for the possibility to take part in such an interesting event.
Always. Perhaps to begin, because this panel is itself sponsored by the Bologna Book Fair, maybe we'll begin with Giorgia, and just, you referred to the study that you've been conducting over the last several years on science, popular science books in the marketplace, in K through 12, in education. Could you give us a little context about
Yes.
what this picture looks like to you, what you've discovered?
Right. So, well, the University of Bologna, supported by Bologna Children's Book Fair, has been working for more than 2 years now at this research project, having as its focus, as I said, the international production of nonfiction picture books for children. In this research, we wanted to map and analyze nonfiction picture books because they are possibly the most remarkable phenomenon in the world of children's books these days, and one in which publishers at the global level are investing an incredible amount of money. The production of nonfiction picture books has literally exploded all over the world in the last 10 years or so, with the publication of more and more titles and the worldwide circulation of many of these titles. There is a whole new shelf, we could say, in bookstores and in libraries of nonfiction picture books these days. So as scholars of children's books, we thought that this new corpus of books, this new medium altogether, deserved some systematic investigation. And we call it a new medium because the nonfiction picture books published in recent years are clearly a different object compared to traditional science books, informational books, encyclopedias for children, compared, that is, to older means used to communicate knowledge to children. So in which ways are they different from older nonfiction books? I will just list a few characteristics that we discovered. Mm-hmm. Typically, the new nonfiction picture books for children come in a big format, or in any case, in a stunning format. They tend to be impressive design objects or graphic design objects more than just books. Yeah. And more importantly, even in these books, the visual code is predominant over the written code. So, I mean, images are much more important than the text. They take much more space. They are much more powerful, effective, and eloquent, even though it may seem like a paradox. And the important thing is that these images are not created by some unknown illustrator, as it happened in traditional nonfiction, where the pictures were just functional in a way, where they were used to better understand the words. Images here are the core of the book, which revolves completely around them, and they are created by famous and talented illustrators. We have one here, and whose name appears on the cover of the book, as well as the name of the author, and often coincides with it. So this panel is about who is the author. In nonfiction picture books, very often the illustrator is the author also. So these are not books that are the outcome of some scientist's intention to explain a concept in a rational way. They are the result of an artist's project, which is mostly visual in its essence. If I may, if you want, I can make some example just to make it clearer how they work. Is it?
Please do. Yes, go for it. We have a little time, please.
Okay, I'll share just my screen, my desktop. Okay, so Colorama, this is just one example by Cruciform, a French artist, both author and illustrator, and this is her most famous book, worldwide known. This is a book about colors, of course, and it is a very thick book with many pages, each of them displaying a different color, or better, a different nuance of color. What the book says is that there aren't just red, yellow, green, blue in the world. There are dozens and dozens of red, of green, of purple, of blue, each of them with a different name and a different object to identify it with in the world. So the book doesn't explain colors, it shows them. It is a visual lesson more than a rational one. And the important thing in a book like this is that children learn to refine their own perception. They learn to pay more attention to the different nuances in the world all around them. They learn to name these nuances. But first of all, they learn to notice them. So this book operates at a very deep level of perception, and it operates by refining it. And this is just one example. And in the end, there's a nuancier with a list of all the nuances and even a thematic index to make it even more nonfiction. So if a child loves trees or flowers or mammals, you can find the pages with the animals in it. And just to make you see it a slightly different one, always by Cruciform. Again, a book that revolves around a visual idea. A compositional idea in this case. The idea is to collect in one page and in each right page different objects, both animate and inanimate, both natural and man-made, and to compose them in the most elegant way. These apparently random objects have one thing in common. They move at the same pace, at the same speed, so 10 kilometers per hour, 20 kilometers per hour, and so on and so forth, faster and faster. As you can see, the text is minimal. It's just the indication of the speed and the name of the objects. And the great effort goes in this tableau in the right page, which are really beautiful tableaux, like posters inspired by Russian children's books of the 30s and 40s, actually, and posters that one could hang up in the wall. So, I mean, the elegance of the composition, the whimsicality of the things put together matters more to Cruciform, or as much as the information provided. So this book is a lesson in beauty as much as it is a lesson in a scientific issue. And this is the characteristics of many of these nonfiction picture books. I have many more examples, but of course I'm running out of time, I guess. Okay.
We can always come back and use them to illustrate,
I have more for later
ourselves.
if you need to, yeah.
The perhaps since the panel, as you noted, the title is "Who is the Author?" So before we go and ask the publishers a little bit more, let me ask each of the authors here about what is your reflection on what Giorgia just said about the priority going in some ways as it being a visual medium that uses the show don't tell is taken quite literally in this context where you're showing more than telling. Either Bernardo or Ilya, if you could respond to this. Perhaps Ilya, would you like to begin?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very relevant issue. And from the beginning, I took it as a collaboration. So I understood my role as to plan. Each of my little books contains, let's say, 32 pages. What should be on each page? It's one of them is kind of a journey. It's a journey of food along alimentation canal. And it's a travel story. So I kind of figure out what needs to be where. But since then, I took it as a collaboration. We would sit down together with an artist and plan what would be there, and I would take time to explain to her everything that needs to be explained, and she would take it her role as a very equal to really tell this story through her pictures. And then I would only, you know, write my letters, my words, and they play I wouldn't say secondary role, but kind of a similar role. And often there'll be sort of a fugue. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the word right. Yeah, fugue. So, for instance, on a certain page, I would be talking about flight in birds in a different book, and she would depict a certain type of finches, certain birds, using their feathers to lean against the air. But she would use the birds, which would become very central to this story 4 pages later. But here we just introduce the way they look and create an image. So it's a very, it's a really, it's like a cinema, you know. I'm kind of a screenwriter.
Like a director almost. You're doing essentially storyboarding in a way,
Yeah.
conceptualizing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And her creative work is really similar. She would come up with many suggestions. Her role is not to illustrate, by no means. It's not illustration. She tells a story.
Right. So in a way, this is a far more collaborative process than one would expect in any way.
Yeah, and I can see it in the future, probably finding an artist who has very strong ideas of her own and matching my story to her creative means.
Yes. Well, I'm hearing very often now, because of the environment, that people are suggesting, for example, books on sports, that there's a woman depicted, where if it's a male writer, they often don't think, oh, wait, women also play this sport. For example, auto racing, it came up recently that, oh, there are no female Formula One drivers, which is not true. There actually are. Exactly. So I'm hearing this is impacting the perception. Bernardo, how do you feel about this process of conception, collaboration, and execution when doing books?
You know, when I was listening to you, I was thinking about something that happened about that the importance of the writer and the illustrator in a book. And I've just finished a graphic novel for teenagers, and it was really well received in Portugal. But the writer is an pessoa. I did some other books with her, and we really go well together. It was funny that everyone asked her for interviews, but not me, you know. and I was like, why is this happening? It's and the book has a lot of silent moments, really a lot, not that much text, but people who read the book think of it as a story, and that I don't know, maybe it's difficult to a lot of people to understand that this book, my role was as important as hers, I think. Maybe. But she started. She wrote it first, but I don't know.
Let me ask. Maybe the publishers can both address this, and maybe we'll start, Natalia, with when you are commissioning and working with an author and illustrator team. What kind of scientific knowledge is required? For example, if it's a book on science or a nonfiction book, of both the writer, you would assume, would have some knowledge. Is this requirement also the same for the illustrator? Because the illustrations of scientific textbooks, of nature books, go back to Audubon, for example, illustrated birds. Darwin, explorers would have illustrators, or they were illustrators themselves, or artists. There's a long history of these kind of collaborations. But as a publisher, what do you look for in putting together teams when working with nonfiction topics where there has to be accuracy in both text and pictures? Maybe Natalia, you have a thought.
Well, okay, I have to say that our publishing house, Alpina Nonfiction, is not specifically tailored for children and kids and for children and teenagers. But we're sure that most of our books are suitable for teenage audience. And we see that they are in much demand among high school students. But Alpina Holding also has a dedicated division that focuses on the books for children. It's called Alpina Children. And this year, Alpina Children have published first nonfiction book for kids. It's called The Origin of Human. And the authors of this, yes, and the authors of this book are two people. One author is anthropologist, and the other author is children's poet. And I think that it is a perfect tandem, a perfect partnership of children's story writer and a scientist. And when we publish books in our publishing house, our books always have scientific editor. This is a scientist, and he can check out all facts in the book. And he can check out the work of a translator, for example. And so that is the team which works on the book. Translator or author, editor, a literature editor, and scientific editor.
So the team is even bigger. When you add the team from the publishing house, you're talking somewhere between 5 to 10 people all have some impact on the ultimate book, the final book.
Yes.
Yes. So so you have an opportunity to always get it correct, or and to also, with many hands come many opportunities for mistakes too. So this is the job of the editor, to make sure that everybody is being correct. Gotcha.
Yes, of course. And but this big team provides perfect result.
Excellent. And Grace, and how do you manage this process? Because you said of 24 titles a year, that's quite a large number of nonfiction books. But as we were just talking about it being a conception rather than necessarily a pitch, it sounds like these books are conceived, and then you bring it together, a team with a writer, an illustrator, and then of course the publishing organization to make it happen, or not.
Not necessarily. Often the idea comes from the author or the author illustrator, as you mentioned. Some of the projects are written and illustrated by the same person, as with Gail Gibbons. She's a very popular author illustrator of science books for young children, 8 and 9 years old. And sometimes we have a 2-person team, as in this book, I Heard a Sound. Now, what happens, often the authors, if it's a separate author, might be a teacher, or, this particular author is a high school science teacher, and we have a series of math books and biographies, picture book biographies by a former elementary school teacher, because not only does the person have to know science, but has to know how to explain science to young children.
Yes.
And the way we pick an illustrator is we do look for illustrators who have something in their portfolio, or sometimes have done a book already, that indicate that they would be particularly good at science. For example, if we are doing something about birds. We want to see what the birds look like in that artist's portfolio. We want to see what what plants and vegetation look like in that portfolio. For a book about science or math, we might want to see how an illustrator can take a scientific idea or a mathematical idea and make it into something that is fun visually. So we are looking for indications that this person would be good. That said, when you look, there's a very wide range of styles here that we're talking about. And we also do have people who vet the books. We go to experts, to people who are the head of departments in museums, to people who are at universities. And we ask them to review our sketches, to review the text, to make sure they're accurate. Even sometimes, to the point where, we'll go to a professor who might just make sure the clothing is right, or that the china on the table is correct. If it's from a certain period.
Yes.
Because in the U.S., as I said, we publish to the school and public library market. Our books are reviewed by professional reviewers in periodicals. If a book is extra special, it gets a star. So we're always looking for those stars. And there are also special awards that are given to books. And all of these are ways that we can get our books out there into the public. But yes, we do have a lot of, we do try to make our books as accurate as possible. And the illustrator has to be willing to make changes and changes and changes until it's right.
Wonderful. So it's a big, long process that takes a lot of attention and a lot of care.
Yes, and longer than I always want it to be, because I think a book is handed in and then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, there's a mistake, That happens a lot. So yes.
Well, let me ask the question. Again, we can kind of go back and anybody can jump in, but maybe we'll start by asking Giorgia a little bit. We've talked about the content, who is the author, how these things are created. When you look at the difference between children's books that's address nonfiction and adult books, one of the elements is that children's books demand an element of surprise, of play, and they really need to tease the curiosity of both the child and the parent who's going to pay for the book. How does one balance this? What elements do you think are most important to have a successful children's book, particularly when it comes to nonfiction, which requires a degree of seriousness? It must be accurate. It must depict the world as it is factually exists, rather than it being fantasy or even imagination, if you will. It's the interplay of fact and imagination. Yeah.
Right. That's precisely the point. What is the balance between accuracy and precision of information, real notions, accurate data, and at the same time an effort in the artistic, creative, aesthetically engaging dimension. So, I mean, in our research, we really looked for titles that could balance those two elements together. And in fact, I'm pleased to say that one of the books that Grace showed will be in our exhibition, the one of the birds, because one of the outcome of this big research project in nonfiction picture books is a great exhibition. With the help of Bologna Children's Book Fair, we got in touch with publishers all over the world and asked them to please send us the titles that they thought were most innovative, groundbreaking, I should say beautiful, the titles that could balance those two elements together: knowledge, information on one side, but also sophisticated aesthetical research. So like experimentation in terms of beauty, in terms of style, stylish books. And so we collected 650 titles from all the countries in the world, and the exhibition will display all of these titles to show how many different styles there can be that really succeed both in delivering knowledge, but also a sense of wonder, because I think that's the point. With children, you have to raise a sense of wonder, as you said, curiosity, and the education is also an education in taste, in beauty, in you know, many subtle things, not just notions and data that they should memorize and store, but being active readers, encouraged to be involved in the process of knowing, so with their senses. So they don't operate only at a cognitive level, but also at a sensitive one. They play with senses.
There's a sense, I mean, in a sense of engaging their imagination. That's like the sense that we don't talk about. It's not touch or taste or sight. It's some feeling in our soul, if you will.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Ilya, how does that impact how you conceive of books and how you execute them? This sense of trying to bring wonder and play into your work.
I mean, yeah, I can really connect to that. You know, when I need to tell a story, it could be described in very dry words. You can maybe even draw a table, but obviously I prefer to somehow address the right hemisphere. It's an outdated wording, because now we know that both hemispheres have you know, role in both logic and imagery. But if I use this outdated cliche, I try to appeal to the right hemisphere to create very strong images, both through pictures and through the stories which they tell. Whenever I need to touch upon any phenomenon, I try to pick the most connecting, the most striking way to talk about it. At this level, you also get to connect things which are probably not usually interconnected. Let's say I talk about teeth when we start this journey of food, and usually you would need to talk about the anatomy of teeth, their structure, but instead you can have a page where at the same page you can have ancient Egyptians you know, making you know, mending teeth, and sharks which have their teeth which grow throughout their entire lives, and that would create this very synthetic feel, synthetic in a good way. It synthesizes very remote areas of life and of knowledge. Creates a certain touch to it, and I'm not sure if I'm not being chaotic in the way I tell this story, but this is the way I prefer to do it. So
this is a very it's a very popular conception for nonfiction books: counterintuitive presentations, you know, connecting things that don't seem connected, that are disparate,
cross-contextual.
Exactly, cross-contextual is perfect for that. Yeah. Have you run across, Bernardo, have you run across this in your work, in your career so far, that this either cross-conceptual idea or the idea of introducing surprise, I think, is what you're really talking about?
I think that happens all the time, but it's something really difficult to reach, to make something completely new, completely original. It's so difficult. So you know, in Planeta, every year, at least twice a year, we join together just to talk about books and ideas of things that we think that maybe will be a nice book, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, really difficult then to put that, to translate that in a kind of a story or in a book by itself. It's really not that that easy. But it happens all the time that we always try to maybe sometimes not talking about surprises or things that people don't know, but maybe going to talk about the simple things and stuff that we all know and we don't really pay a lot of attention to them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Just sometimes are just small things in our lives.
It's almost like things that we think we are familiar with, and
Yeah,
you explain them in a new way.
it's really important that when you do a book and you are not doing something just for yourself or for your
Mm-hmm.
friends, so it's really important that people will connect with the book, you know, to recognize themselves somehow in this story, in something in particular
Mm-hmm.
of that book, and that's not very easy to do, I think.
Well, let me ask you, as a publisher as well, what Giorgia alluded to the explosion in popularity of these books. Are you seeing, what do you attribute that to? What is the reason for this explosion of popularity, and what trends are you seeing changing? What evolution of trends are you seeing?
The first thing that I think it started so changing like 10 years ago, so it's not brand new. But you know, when I used to go to Bologna like 20 years ago, when I got there, I could see the French books. They really look like French books, and the Russian books, they really like Russian books, you know. And the Korean books, they were Korean books, and the Portuguese books were Portuguese books. And today, I don't think things are like that anymore. So because suddenly a lot of people start getting really interested in illustration. So, and suddenly illustration, there are courses and courses, and the university studying what was done before and what is being doing now. So it's something really brand new, but I think it's really important that this is happening, because now you can see how difficult it is to make something really original, and even with something that it doesn't exist for that long of a time, you know. But of course, it's an incredible moment to because there's a lot of exploration in the way we illustrate stuff, and the way we think the text and on a drawing.
What I understand from a publishing point of view is these books are very globalized, is what you're saying, that there's no individual style.
More and more and more. Yeah.
And so each illustrator and team is competing with others.
Yeah, right now, instead of just knowing the work of my fellow Portuguese illustrators, now with my phone I can reach thousands of different styles and different people that, of course, will influence me, and probably the way I do things will change because I saw something. I don't know.
Grace, you had something to say. You wanted to add something.
Yes, I did. Also, because it's so much easier to work with international illustrators now. Like I know that I've been working with more illustrators from all around the world, because for a couple of reasons. One is because they're working electronically, so you don't have that issue of sending so your artwork overseas, so it's much more so it's much more global. For example, this is an original book. Not only is the illustrator Italian, but the author is Italian, which is interesting because English is her second language, but she's very good at it. So that's another reason for the globalization. That said, I still find that editorially there can be many differences, especially when it comes to science.
Natalia, are you finding the same? Are you finding the same changes in the market for how you acquire and edit books? It's more globalized as a business.
Yes, of course, it's more global, and we publish many books of foreign authors. We translate these books from English and other languages, and well, I can say that European design in book publishing, it makes trends, and when we buy the text, we always or often buy pictures as well, because they're perfect, and but we also have good Russian illustrators, and if text is written by Russian authors, we try to find an illustrator in our country. But I can repeat that European illustrations, they are in trend. We orient on we try to study.
Find the best. Yeah, find the ones you like. Do because children's books, I know again you publish for older people as well, but maybe somebody could address this. Is there an opportunity for more translation of children's books simply because the text is shorter and because they tend to be heavier? The illustrations are so key. Are we going to see more of this? And perhaps this is a question that might be best for, well, Grace. Would you like to take that? I mean, do you find it more accessible to publish a translation just simply because the costs of translating it are going to be much less than in the past?
Yes, that's true. The cost is less. There are more challenges because the authors and illustrators aren't as known in the U.S. So and they often can't go on tour because it's so expensive. Although now that we're all working through the web, that might be a little bit different. But and I do find that for picture books, it's often I will be given an English translation of a text for a language I don't understand, like in an Asian language. I can usually picture read many picture books, which is the great thing about a picture book, because you can read it without even knowing the text. So so I think it's easier for picture books than for novels.
Mm-hmm. And I know you alluded to this just briefly as you talked about when it comes to science books in particular, there are very distinct cultural signifiers. And I'm going to pick on Germans at the moment because I like to joke about this, that every German science book I pick up, the author photo, the gentleman, often it's a man, is in a lab coat, and it's Dr. Professor, and they have 16 degrees all listed behind their name, and the book might be literally about brushing your teeth, but it must be, and I'm curious if each of you could talk a little bit about, is that the case in the US? I know that's not necessarily the case, that the author must be wearing a lab coat. But how about Ilya, how about you for yourself? Have you ever been depicted in a lab coat?
Mansplaining, is that what you're refer?
Could be, maybe.
Well, yeah, they do make me wear that one. Last one was for a long shoot for Marie Claire. It's a glossy women's magazine.
Of course.
And I feature in September issue, and yes, they made me wear one. So that's exactly the point. It's embarrassing almost, it's my version of a drag.
It's quite funny. Is that, I mean, do you, Bernardo, have you, as a publisher, do you, what is the feeling like in Portugal or in sort of the Latin countries towards this perception of a scientist as a, you know, as a person in a lab coat with scientific, very important scientific equipment behind them, and this is what must be conveyed as the author of a book?
You know, that for me it's a problem, because I really don't like those stereotypes and things like that, you know. But I don't think it exists anymore. I think it's something that it's disappearing. As a matter of fact, we did a book with scientists recently about the brain, a really big book here, and Madalena Matos illustrated it. And you know, it was incredibly funny to meet all those scientists and all those persons completely different from us, and but we get really well together.
Well, we're in a moment right now in the world where there's a huge respect for science and research, not just because of children, but because the pandemic has put the word hero is often used with regard to nurses and doctors. And Natalia, is this a subject that, as a publisher, looking at your lists going forward, for example, the heroism of doctors, researchers trying to find a vaccine for the COVID-19, is this something that has come into the thinking of the books that you want to publish looking into 2020 or 2021?
Yes, sure. We have some plans about publishing books about scientists and doctors and the situation with COVID. And next year, I think our readers will see some of these books. Some of these books are now translated from English, and also we have an idea to publish a book of Russian author.
And Grace, how about yourself? Is this something that you've seen in submissions, and people are looking to depict this, you know, this newfound interest, or find a way to communicate this to kids?
I have not. I have not seen
Okay.
any difference over the past 6 months. We've traditionally had an interest in science and math, so I don't see a difference.
Is there what kind of trends have you seen coming that are, what kind of trends are being popularized now, or do you feel that it's really up to the publisher to make the trends, perhaps?
Are you asking me?
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry.
And then we'll ask everybody.
It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. Yeah.
Yes, it's hard to see trends right now when so much is changing. But I think that the one thing we saw is that isn't really so much. Well, I think at-home learning is really important now, and reaching parents, letting parents know about the good nonfiction books that are out there that they can use to help their children learn in a happy, kid-friendly way, is a really good direction. So that might influence publishing in the future. I'm not sure, but it certainly is a good thing for right now.
It's really becoming a big need, is these books that people might have said, okay, no, we'll get something more entertaining. Now really something edifying and educational is going to be important. Yeah. Is that, Giorgia, since you're looking at you're looking at a big picture, What kind of trends are you seeing in this movement, and how has that been reflected in your studies since you've been looking at nonfiction books? Are you seeing an evolution in the way either the subjects or the way books are presented?
Yeah, we in our research were more interested in searching for innovative books in terms of how knowledge was presented. So
Sure.
non-traditional ways of presenting it, which means, for example, books in which the child reader has to have an active role. So
Yep.
books in which you provide data which are accurate and precise, but the connection among these data, the conclusion, the interpretation is left open for the child reader to think about. So what we loved about in our research was to find that more and more books are both authoritative but also open books in terms of their final meaning. Like children must be co-authors of the final meaning of these data. In broad cultural terms, what do these data mean? Like, for example, there's a book, French book called Each Second in the World. And then each double page displays two figures. So each second in the world, 4 babies are born, 2 people die.
Right.
Does it say something about overpopulation? So each second in the world, 40 trees are cut down, 2 trees are replanted. It doesn't say anything else. It's left for the child reader to think about it and get to some conclusion. So these are really interesting in our research. When you ask the child reader not to memorize and store things, information, but to contribute to the meaning of knowledge.
It asks them to connect those pieces of information.
Right. So we found a lot of books open in that way, and this is the trend we were more interested in.
It's interesting, and I'm not sure who to ask this question of, but I was just looking around my house, and for example, this is a set of children's books from the 1970s, and it's a book called, the New Book of Knowledge, right? And there's 20-volume encyclopedia for children, and it says this is all of the knowledge in the world you need. And it's interesting, as Grace alluded, that home learning is so important. So is there a movement for somebody to, as a child, I think all of us are probably old enough that we would have, this comprehensive small encyclopedia library that our parents would buy us, or that we would borrow, or it was given to us. These books, those type of publishing trends don't exist anymore. This small library of knowledge. I'm curious why that might be, and if that's something that might be revived as home learning becomes more important. But the other question, and I think the answer might be, is no, of course not, because we now have the internet. So I'm curious about the interplay between nonfiction books and the internet. And if I'm not sure who would like to try and answer this. Anybody? Grace, would you like to start? And then I know it looks like Bernardo has something to add.
Sure. I loved those books. I had a set, and they were so much fun to pore over because they had all kinds of crazy things in it. They had literature, they had science, they had these plastic pages, and you can see the body through the. They were wonderful. They're very expensive and also a bit dry, and the teaching is very old fashioned. That said, I think trade houses are looking for a more exciting way to present science and these ideas to children now. But I think there are still houses that are publishing the encyclopedia type book for school libraries, for this school libraries. I've seen them on the shelves. They're series of books about countries or animals or biomes. but they're not really, they're really focused on school and not so much for the consumer.
Right. Bernardo, you looked like you had a thought there when I mentioned the interplay of nonfiction and the internet, and I'm curious about that.
Well, I'm really into the paper books, and I think it's not just it's a bit crazy to go and pick different stuff to things or to a story become particularly more appealing. I think maybe people talked about something, but maybe there's a way of telling it in a better way and tell this story, or to teach something in a better way without bringing technology and stuff to it. I don't know.
So you're antagonistic to the idea of introducing technology and interaction with your texts, with your books.
Yeah, maybe it's not the kind of theme that I most appreciate.
Sure.
I don't know. Right now, I'm doing right now I'm doing a book about our relation with internet and the fake news and everything. And I was thinking that I should just do landscapes and natural illustrations for this book, and not one single illustration of a cell phone or whatever. It should be something exactly the opposite, But
sure.
Maybe people wouldn't understood it. I'm not sure. I'm thinking about it.
Exactly. This is why I asked the question. Ilya, have you had this? What is your stance? Because I know you've done some very interesting, work, interactive work that's been very popular online. I think mostly for adults, though. So I'm curious what you think of this interplay between nonfiction and the internet, the book and the web.
Well, I think best. I haven't done much in terms of continuing the book into the web, but I know that Natalia's publishing house, the children branch, it does this really a lot. They publish a book, and in the end, it's got a QR code, and the book is just the beginning of the adventure. The QR code leads to tasks, to quizzes, to all kinds of things. As for the more general sort of frame which you touched upon, I don't think the shift was from knowledge to internet. I think the shift was from let me say it again. No, I don't think the shift was from paper to internet. I think the shift was from the concept of knowledge to the concept of shaping the worldview. Okay. Not just piling up the facts, but rather making people familiar with things which are out there and which are interesting, and what's there to explore, to exploration. And obviously, yes, we've got just so many things now to talk about and to learn. The knowledge has expanded so much that you can never. It was a great sale probably back in the 70s, because it comes all in one neat package, but it's just not the case anymore.
Right. Well, in a sense, the one thing books do is they do curate knowledge. They do narrow it down, that you're going to focus on this specific set of knowledge, rather than the internet, which you can get lost, as we all have done.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, curating.
Okay. Natalia, as Ilya alluded to, your publishing house does this interactive process with their books. Has that been successful? Is that something you feel that that the readers and the kids, the children and the parents appreciate?
Well, I can tell you about books and internet. My answer to a question is connected with previous question about new trends. Because our publishing house initiates writing new science books. We find young, maybe not young scientists, who are also video bloggers. For example, yeah, a scientist has a YouTube channel where he tells kids and adults about biology or anthropology or chemistry, and we propose these scientists to write a book. And his followers in internet, they become our readers because they like to buy these books. And this is maybe well, a little bit different things, because many people they like to have at home a paper book in which they can find all this knowledge, all these topics, all these stories which they have listened or in YouTube channel. And
so in a way, it goes from the internet into a book instead of from a book into the internet. It's quite the opposite.
Yes, yes.
Exactly. Wow. So we have about 15 minutes or so left, or 15-20 minutes. One of the suggestions from the book fair was to, since we have, 5 experts. Five. My math is not always so good. 5 experts here creating children's books, and we talked about the conception of a book. The idea is to play a little game and pick a single topic and have everybody add a different twist to this conception of the book. And maybe what we can do is suggest, we can pick a subject about how we would write a book. And I will pick the subject, and then we can, and each of you can add a little bit to this. Is this okay? You're willing to try it? And maybe we'll come up with an idea. And since this is the moment, as I described, the biggest story in the world right now is the pandemic, right? Is COVID. How does one, let's say if we start with this subject, how does one take that kind of subject and turn it into a book that it has all these elements that we just described? It's fun, it's counterintuitive, it's informative, it's accurate, and it's the kind of thing that you actually would like to buy and have in your home and put on display and read. This is not the easiest subject, right? Because it's very, very challenging. It can be very painful. People are sick. People are trying to solve a big problem. So let's take that as the subject. How do we begin this process of conceiving a book and creating one? And maybe who would like to begin, rather than ask somebody to begin? Who feels like they might have a beginning on this? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Grace. Would you like to begin?
First, I have a question, because
sure.
Whenever I think of a science, working on a science book, I think about who is the audience. So are we going to create a book for a 3 or 4-year-old, or for 8, 9, or 10-year-old? So so I don't know if anyone wants to focus on the age group. I'm happy to go either way, but I think it is important to establish that.
Well, Grace, which one would sell better?
There you go.
I don't think there's. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it matters.
If both of them are really bad ones, which will sell worse?
There you go. Well, why don't we go for a little older? Let's go for. So I'll do this. Let's go for a little older, middle grade. So say 7 to 12. So you can 8 to 12. So you have a little bit of an older range, or we can go younger for illustrations. Let's start with that. Since Natalia, what would you say? What is the first thing that you would want? What's the first step in conceiving a book in this way? Like, what would be the first thing that you would want to have as an editor?
I think that for this book, the best variant is a tandem of a scientist, for example, any doctor, and a good storyteller, a children's writer, a children's author, and together they can write good text, interesting for reading, and with checked facts. So, well, I will start from looking for these two authors.
Mm-hmm.
We have them. They're here.
There you go. Okay, Giorgia, you have a thought here. Yes, go for it.
Just if each of us is playing his or her own role, as a critic of children's books, I would appreciate more a book about this, like any other subject, but this subject that involves not just a doctor or an expert as the ones mentioned now, but also a philosopher. To me, a good book about COVID is a book that starts from very far away and connects this problem to a much wider problem, having to do with what we've done to our planet and civilization, and what's the pro and cons about civilization, and making, next generations more responsible, more respectful, maybe so I mean, it's not just about explaining how it works, maybe in a easy, or if we can say funny, well, that's impossible way, but it's just about making children realize this is a problem that is a philosophical problem more than anything else.
There's a spiritual element.
Just a suggestion as a critic.
Of course. Fernando, what do you think? Where would you begin?
Well,
or what would you add?
At first I was thinking about making something dramatic, like all the older people would die and only children stay and stuff like that. What would happen from there? But then I think I would go for the good things about all this problem, and the good things that I can remember. It's we are not so, in a way, the planet got some rest from us, from our travelings, from our pollution. I don't think that's true, but okay, that would be really nice that we would, as a human species, to recognize how terrible we can be in this planet, and the way we treat it. It's really gross. So.
Like the animals coming back into the cities, or
I really like those images and those kind of things. Yeah, I'm a romantic. Sorry.
No, or the fact that that the world has been more quiet since the COVID has started.
Well, that's precisely what I was, thinking about. Yeah.
Ilya, what does this bring to mind for you?
Well, I would not add, I would subtract the scientist. I would ditch him altogether, because they cannot write, and a ghost writer wouldn't help. I would find a writer who can write and who is interested in this stuff, who's educated enough. Obviously find an illustrator who would be, same-minded and interested in that subject. And, I would just dive into the world of virology, which is fascinating, and it opens so many facets to it. I would just, the book would be at the scale so as to teach that if we kill all the viri on Earth, the life will stop immediately. And I would go into the way, this planet belongs to viruses, and the way bats live with viruses in a very tolerant way. And useful viruses, which we use to make vaccines, and which we can use to fight other microbes. So I would, have this very broad context of virology, against which I would depict the current pandemic. And the past pandemics, I would use lots of history, lots of, humanities, the way vira interact with human society, with culture. That would be very interesting.
In a way, we're
in
connected
past.
with our past.
That's
We're
right.
not we're not
Yes.
alone in this.
Yeah. You know, the first major pandemic of coronavirus was called Russian flu in 1890, as hypothesized by several prominent European virologists I interviewed. So Russian flu was the first coronavirus pandemic. And young Winston Churchill wrote a poem about it.
Really?
And I already had a prominent Russian poet translating it and reading it aloud for my podcast. So I would use that. I already have that translation. So
Fascinating. Yes. I guess if I was going to make a contribution beyond the subject, the thing that I would be really curious to see somebody include in this is the idea of randomness. You know, the idea that we don't have control over who it's going to infect and how it's going to impact our lives, and how you would, and even what the impact it has on people's bodies. It's always different for everybody. So finding some way of depicting this in the book, is that I think that this, not that it's meant to be scary, but that it's almost like
it's beautiful. It's even beautiful to a degree.
Right. There's an unpredictability. Again, that's that element of surprise, but in a way that would be palatable, acceptable to children. About something that's so, in some ways, very frightening too. So you play with this idea. I would not know how to depict this, but that's what the artists do.
Good thing about coronavirus is that it spares the young. So
there you go. Yes. So not so scary for them, just scary for us. I know. I like this idea of Bernardo's, of the world populated just by children, as sad as it is. This is that's a different type of book. I think it's been done many times. Great. So we're going to wrap things up. We have just a few more minutes. Is there one, since we're going to be saying goodbye to the audience out there, is there one message or one idea that each of you would like to end on as far as nonfiction children's books? And one of the easiest things I always like to ask is there something that people get wrong consistently about your work or the work that publishers do with these books that you would like to correct, or make sure that people, something that you hear often and you think, oh, I wish people would stop saying this. Does anything come to mind in particular? A point of frustration, perhaps. Bernardo.
To me, of course, because when people talk about work, my friends just say, "Oh, come on, you just do drawings." It's just like, okay, come on. So I live with that all the time.
You and your colored pencils and your paints and your prismatic, yes, exactly. Your Pantone wheel. This is not work. Natalia, is there something that you find yourself when you talk to people that they have a perception of the work you do, of even publishing in Russia, of children's books that you would like to correct, or of books in general?
No, I can't. Nothing to correct. I just can tell, buy books, love books, and we will work for you, dear readers. Right. Dear children and their parents.
Exactly. Ilya, does something come to mind?
Probably not that interesting to international audience, but people keep referring to me as a scientist when they try to sell me as high as they can. Right. And I did earn a doctorate, but I kept telling them to skip that, because I'm kind of I tell a story. I'm an educator, or rather entertainer. Mm-hmm. I would correct that.
It's interesting, yes. I mean, I
really like to hear you. I don't know how to say your name, but it was really nice to hear you. I can see why you are so popular.
It's really an exaggeration, but I love to meet one time and talk. I really loved the way you talk about books.
Okay.
I'd love to see your work.
Yeah, thanks.
And Grace, how about you? Is there something that a thought you'd like to end on, or a thought that you'd like to, something that you'd like to throw out there, a spanner, if you will?
I guess I'd just like to throw out how much I enjoy working on nonfiction, because there's so much confusion in the world, and it's wonderful to know that my wonderful colleagues here and I have an opportunity to to help children learn how to think and learn how to navigate their world.
Excellent. Grace? Oh, not Grace. I'm so sorry. Georgia.
Just maybe a final thought that I could throw in is that what I get frustrated by is that traditionally nonfiction has been seen or considered as a literature of answers. It is still very much so, especially by parents and teachers, a literature where children must find the answers. I like to think about it as a literature that raises questions. And I mean, it's still nonfiction if it teaches children to think about things in a way that they, it raises questions.
Yes.
It questions the acquired knowledge. So that's also nonfiction, to question what we think is given. And so not many people see nonfiction as the opportunity to raise questions instead of giving answers. So.
Absolutely. And I suppose if I had a chance to say something, it would be, simply that nonfiction books or scientific books, books of knowledge for children, are just as applicable for adults. That it's often, and the information in them is often far, far more accessible than a popular science book written for adults, even for the mass market. That's the ones that are oriented to children can give you a very nice introduction to very complicated subjects that is more than suitable for adults as well. And that I think we miss this opportunity sometimes because we think, oh, it's a children's book, it has pretty pictures. And so you can't take it seriously, where adults should take them very seriously in some ways. And that's the only thing I think of at this. I just want to go back and say thank you very much to everybody who's participated in the panel. Maybe each of you can just say briefly where we can find more about you, if just so we have on the record, if you each have a website that we can refer to, and you could let everybody know. So we can start with Georgia, and then we'll just ask everybody to mention their web address so we can find out more about your work. Please go ahead.
I don't have I have a university, of course, web address, and you just dial Giorgia.Grilli, which is my name and surname, and you'll find my email. And a new book is coming about nonfiction picture books. So if you're interested, just drop me an email and I'll let you know more about it.
Google you. Natalia, how would we find out more information about your work?
Okay, we have site opinabooks.com or .ru. Well, just
feel free to look.
So there you can find all our books.
Perfect. Bernardo?
So you can see what I do in Planeta Tangerine account in Instagram, Facebook, or on our site. That it's a shop that you can buy our books. Of course, you should. And that's it. I don't have private pages or something. My email is from Planeta. So if you can contact Planeta Tangerine, you are contacting me.
Wonderful. Grace?
Our website is holidayhouse.com. We're on Instagram and Facebook. I think on Facebook we're Holiday House Books for Young Readers.
Perfect. And Ilya, where would you like us?
Everything is in Russian. So I mean, there is a platform which is called Telegram, which is best protected from the government. This is why Russians use it.
Of course.
Best encrypted. And I have a Telegram channel called Naked Mole Rat. In Russian, it's Golый Землекоп. It's not a naked rat. It's a it's a mammal, you know, naked mole rat. It doesn't
Yes,
have
the
cancer.
mole.
So anyway, and it's connected to my podcast. You can find me there, but it's in Russian.
Wonderful. Excellent. And I'm Edward Nawotka at Publishers Weekly, publishersweekly.com. The Bologna Book Fair, Bologna Fiere, you can find, happening every year, we hope, again in Italy in March or April. And every year the Moscow Book Fair as well, happening in Moscow at this time of the year. And we encourage everybody to, to take time, explore what you've heard here. And if anybody wants to reach out, please feel free. People here are, we really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you so much for listening, participating, and we hope that next year that we won't have to talk about a book about COVID. We can come up with something more fantastical. Travel to Mars. Let's hope for that one. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much, and have a great day. We're
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye
Thank
now.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
nice
everybody.
to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you all too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll
Great.
do
Thank you.
Bologna next year. We'll see.
Bye.
Exactly.
Bye.